Hey friends, welcome. It is week 5, lecture 3. We're talking about building something from scratch, and we're going to use Team Manager as something we're going to build. I haven't built anything for this, so we are really going to start. We're going to build our backend today. Really basic CRUD functionality, finding one, updating one, doing all that fun stuff. And then on Monday or Tuesday, sorry, we're going to connect the backend to the front end and then do some front end stuff, and then we'll finish it up on Wednesday. Thursday, we will deploy in our office hour. And instead of doing like an assignment, I'll show you a deployment. And then if we want to, we'll do some questions for the exam and then any sort of advanced stuff that I want to make sure that you learn. I do try to give you guys the best way to and sort of set you up to where there's nothing overwhelmingly challenging on the exam. So that way we're all set up. Cool. So we took a little bit of a unanimous vote. We just took a vote and it was very unanimous that we want to do Team Manager, which is great. We can absolutely do that. So we're going to build that out today. Now, if you haven't taken a belt exam with us from a full stack perspective, it's going to look similar to this, where basically whenever you open up your exam, and we're going to talk way more about this in the next week, but when you open up your exam, it's going to have multiple, these are what we call wireframes. So basically just build out to what it's supposed to look like. I'm not super stringent on like colors. If your colors are off or if they're different, I'm not that big of a, it's not that big, it's not a big deal to me, transparently, because CSS, you can get down a rabbit hole. I care more about the functionality as you create a full stack application. But I do ask that you will, and we'll do this, like there's really simple things like Bootstrap that we can use, or if you wanted to move forward, I think in advanced MERN, or no, it's in this one right here, sorry. Full stack MERN, there's material UI that we can use. This is in the advanced portion of the full stack MERN. So I would just say Bootstrap's probably easiest. That's what I'll use just to make it not look terrible and basic. But even at the end of the day, if you look basic, there's just a few points for like CSS. Basically, did you try to make it look approachable? Change some colors, whatever. But CSS is not a large portion. So if you did no CSS, you would still be able to pass. Just wanted to point that out. I just asked that you give a little bit of effort there. Cool. But you can get something like this, where you've got a wireframe, and it's going to ask you to do certain things. You're going to get these little sticky notes that say, okay, we want to do X, Y, and Z. Here we've got a player. In this case, we've got a player, and we want to be able to, it looks like we want to be able to manage players, manage player status. We want to add a player. We want to list players. We want to see manage player status should show this guy. So we'll bring that up. And then we are going to be able to see, this is our list, add player. This is our list of players, sorry. And then this is our add player. What I will also add on is we're going to want to create a link here where if I click this player, I want to see just their stats, right? I want to be directed to just them. So we'll add that in. That's going to be more of a front end thing. But for today, all we're going to do is we're going to build our backend. It's going to be very similar to what we just did in office hour. Actually, it's going to be identical to what we just did in office hour, but we'll build it together and we'll be rocking and rolling. And then we'll connect the front end on Monday. Cool. Because I just did this in office hour, and for the sake of everybody here, I think it'd be great if we built this as a team. I know that we will have done this multiple times in the last week, but that's okay. So let's build this as a team. I'm going to start from scratch. So I don't have anything installed. I don't even have my folder created. Actually, I do have my folder created. That was a blatant lie, and I'm so sorry. We're going to call this, actually, let's CD back. And I'm going to I'm going to CD back one more time in FebMERN. And I'm going to make a new directory. So I could say mkdir and then write my folder and then CD into it. But if you guys remember, I created what we call an alias, where mkcd for me, that will not work for you unless you created the same alias. This just makes a directory and then CDs into it after. So I'm going to call this belt prep. Cool. Now I'm in belt prep. I'm going to have two things, right? I'm going to have, what are my two main folders that are going to be in belt prep? Anybody remember? Okay, server, yep, and client. Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to say mkdir And I'm going to do this because I don't want to CD into them yet. I just want to make 2 folders. I'm going to have my client, and then I'm going to have my server. What goes in what? Is my server my front end or my back end? Is my client my front end or my back end? Yeah, exactly. My client's my front end, right? That's where I'm going to run npm or npx create React app, right? I actually should not have ls. Let's see, rm rf client. Okay, rm rf means to remove a folder. I just realized I want to create React app, my client first. Yeah, so I want to say npx create React app. If you guys remember this, it's way back in the day, but I want to npx create my React app, my client. I don't want to do client and then run npx create React app because I want to create that folder. So that was my fault. So now it's creating a React app. This is probably gonna take forever. My Wi-Fi is not super killer. But in the meantime, while this is doing that, what are some things that I'm gonna do? Let's just think about our model, right? Like when we look at this, it's not gonna be blatant. And it's not gonna say your model needs to consist of this field and this field and this field and this field. What are some things, if I'm just looking at this, and I'll put this, if this is too small, I'll put this in the chat for you guys. This is the assignment. What are some fields I'm going to need for my player? Yeah, first name, last name, preferred position. Yeah. And what else will I need potentially? So that's 2 things here. But if we're looking at this entire assignment, so it looks like here's my list, right? So I've got a team name. Team name looks like that should be player name, because if you look there, it's player name and preferred position. So I don't know why that says team name. So exactly, Jonathan, we need our player status, right? We're going to have 3 games that is going on. And if you're looking at this, kind of look at these little notes here. It says, this should be your default route when the user clicks manage player status. Check status should be undecided, highlighted as yellow. Playing should be highlighted as green. Not playing or undecided yellow. Not playing is red. So what that tells me is I need to have basically a game 1, a game 2, and a game 3 status, right? Because what I infer that I want to do is I want to be able to click on a button and change that status to, okay, this player is playing, or they're not playing, or they're undecided yet, right? And so what I'll need in order for me to manipulate those values, think about it like state, right? If I already want to manipulate these values, I will need to have access to those specific values. So that's exactly right. I'm going to have a game 1, a game 2, and a game 3, and then, or I'll have status in there as well. Cool. So let's come here. Perfect. Now if I ls, I've got my client and my server, but my client, if I cd into it, it has all of my good stuff that for my React, but I don't care about that right now because gross. We're just going to deal with the backend. Okay, so I'm going to cd into server. What are some things that I'm going to need as well? So I created my server. What are some things? What's my next step here? I guess we can even look here. Or no, we need to. Yeah, exactly, Bear. I need to, there's quite a few things. So good job, guys. I first need to do a few things. I don't have anything in here. So I'm going to make a directory, dir. I'm going to say controllers, config, models, routes. Perfect. Now I have all of those folders. Bear said I need a server JS. Perfect. Now I've got my server JS file. Now, great job, guys. You guys are crushing it. Grant, you're exactly on. I need to npm init-y. What does this do? What does npm init-y do?
Install MongoDB.
It doesn't quite install MongoDB, but it sets us up, right? It creates what we call our package JSON. But good thinking, you're right there. And it creates our package JSON and allows us to actually install things. So when I run npm init it gives us this guy right here. So if I open up this code, let's open it. Okay. Now, if I open up this code and I come in here, I have this new package JSON. And it just has some basic information, but now it allows us to do a couple things. Yeah, exactly, Chris. I need to create, so I'm gonna cd back into my server, and I'm going to npm install Express and Mongoose. And now, just like you said, Tim, because I have that package JSON, I can now do that, which looks like we're good to go. I come back to my folder structure. Now, because I've just installed Express and Mongoose, I also get this package lock JSON, and I get this node modules. Anytime I see node modules, what do I have to make sure I have as well? Yeah, exactly. I get ignore, right? So I want to make sure I'm in my server. I'm going to say get ignore, and I'm going to ignore my node module. Perfect. Good job, guys. You guys are crushing it. Easy peasy. Okay. Now, all right, our whole backend is set up. We will eventually install cores, Christopher, but we haven't talked about it yet. We're going to talk about that on Monday when we start connecting the two. So we'll talk about that on Monday. But yes, essentially would also install cores with that. Cool. So where would you guys start? Anybody have any ideas? We know that we're going to build this. And if you guys were in office hour, maybe you have a better idea. Where would you really start here? What is my first starting point? Yeah, my config. I want to set up my database first, right? So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to name this file, and I'm going to name it Mongoose because I want it to know mongoose config.js, right? I'm configuring my Mongoose, i.e. I'm setting up my database. So if I come here, what am I going to do? You also don't have to memorize this stuff in regards of like this setting up the config file, not that big of a deal because we already know that we can come right here. So if you guys are stressing about having everything memorized, let's don't worry about it because it's here and it's not super necessary to have everything memorized, but it's important to know what everything is doing. So one thing I need to do is I need to name my DB. So I'm going to name this team manager DB. We're just going to call it that. Cool. So I'm going to come in here and we tested it. What should happen is, and we can test it real fast, but I don't think it's going to work. For some reason, normally whenever you run this and you get this up and running and it makes a connection, what it will do is it'll automatically, if this database doesn't exist, it'll create it. But in office hour, we were trying to do that. It didn't do that. So we actually had to go end up in creating it, but we'll test it out one more time. Maybe I just fat fingered it or did something incorrectly. And then, but if not, we can go in and change that. Cool. So you set up our config file, and now I need to do a few things. I need to go into my server. In order for anything to even be set up, I've got to set up my server. So what will I start with here in my server.js? What's my sort of first thing I'm going to do? First thing we do all the time. Yeah, exactly, Katie. We need to require Express. Hope you're feeling better, by the way. So we're going to say Express. Const Express equals require Express. So we're bringing in Express for us, bringing in our framework. I'm also need to now make our app, and we're going to set up our port. Eventually, we will add in this thing called cores. Cores allows for us to make requests across servers so from our client to our backend. Right now, we're not dealing with it. I'm going to bring that in right now, but we don't need it because I haven't installed it yet. But I'll just put it right there just because it is good to know. Again, we're going to talk about that on Tuesday. But I've taken in course, perfect. Now I need to require my config file, right? I want to make sure that we are running that and we are good to go there. So I'm requiring my config file. Now there's, if I'm handling a post request, I want to make sure that I have my app.use, our express JSON. This is my middleware in order for me to handle my post request. And then my last two things I'm going to need in my server is I need to bring in my routes, right? We don't have any routes yet, but I need to bring them in. And then I need to do my app.listen, right? I need to tell it where it's going to listen, and particularly it's going to listen on port 8000. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to say require, R-E-Q-U-I-R-E. I'm going to bring in, my routes player. So we don't have this built yet, but I'm going to bring this in. And we talked about this in office hour. There's two ways that we could do it. Basically, we could have passed in some sort of value and then passed in app, or we could just do it this way. This is doing the same exact thing. So if you've seen it in another way, like if you've seen it another way than this, then both of them work just fine. And then lastly, we are listening. Cool. So my server set up. Everything should be good to go. Now, right now I would have an issue because I don't have my routes. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's cd. So let's see ls. Where am I? Oh yeah. Okay, this is what we just did. Sorry. So I'm running Nodemon. See if there's any issues. Cool. Establish a database connection. Now, I don't see team manager. Oh, this is so frustrating. And maybe Compass is just the worst. Nothing. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say team manager.db. Not .db, it's an _db. And then here I'm going to just call this players, because that's what we're building. And remember, it's plural. Cool. So now I've got a team manager DB with a collection called players. So let's go into my code. Now we have built this. This is good to know. We know we've now established that our database is set up and connected. So our config file can go away. We don't need to open that anymore. We don't need to open up this git ignore. And transparently, until we get our routes going, we don't even need to open this. So I'm actually going to do this. And I'm not going to do this because I'm going to kill my server. But I'm going to keep this on the side. Where would you guys go next? We've done our config. That's good. Now we have 3 more folders. We have to do certain things. So where would you start next? I love the way you guys are thinking. Let's do our models, right? Let's go into our models and let's create our player, right? That's usually a great way to start because from our models, then we go to our controllers, then our routes. This just kind of makes sense, at least to me. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say player.model.js. Perfect. Now, in order for me to do anything and create an instance of a model in my DB, what is the first thing I need to bring in? Yeah, exactly. That's our tool, right? Our mongoose. So I'm going to say const mongoose equals require mongoose. This is what's going to allow us to actually create our model instance, right? So now I need to create my player schema. There's a few things we talked about that we need to have, right? So first and foremost, I need to have a name. Now, this looks like, if I'm looking at this guy, let's see, advanced MERN, come to team manager. So I'm looking at this, it's just player name. So name is fine. We don't need a first name and a last name. We don't need to break those apart because right here, just based off of how this is set up, it's just one name. So yeah, if you had a first name and a last name, then you would want to have the different pieces. But because of how this form, and we're just kind of replicating this, then we're just going to say player name. So let's come here. And we're going to say name is going to be a type string. It's going to be type string. And then we're going to want it to be required. That is true. This player must have a name. This would be very confusing. And let's go ahead and give it a minimum length. In this case, we're going to call it 2. Perfect. Now, what I also want to add in is their preferred position. Perfect. This is going to be type string as well. It's going to be required. It is required. And then a minimum length of 2. And that's perfectly fine. Now, what we talked about is we see this guy and we see game 1 and they have some sort of status, right? They're either playing or not playing or undecided. Game 2, playing, not playing, undecided, or game 3, playing, not playing, undecided, right? And so what I want to do is I actually want to create some value. We're going to call it game 1 status. Oh my gosh, can't type to save my life today. And so this is going to be a string, but I'm going to introduce something else. This is going to be sort of required, but I'm going to introduce another value that we could do, and this is called enum. And so what this is we can say that the value has to be one of these 3. So by doing enum in this, we're saying it can only be one of these 3 values. So yes, it's required, but if they do anything outside of undecided or playing or not playing, then that's not allowed. That's not acceptable, right? Even if it is a string and it meets the minimum length, that does not matter. It has to be this guy right here. And the last one I want to do is we can do default. So by default, what is this going to be? It's kind of like whenever we have a parameter and if they don't pass in a value, what is it? So we can pass in a default value of undecided. And that'll be important because looks like when we're building and creating our player, we only have 2 fields, right? Player name and preferred position. So by having that default field, we can by default have everybody undecided and then go in as the team manager and change things around. Any questions? Those are 2 new things that we've built in. Any questions on this? Game 2 status is going to be the exact same thing. And then we're going to have game 3 status. Oops. Exact same thing.
So for the exam, we can hard code like the amount of games. If say this was the exam, it doesn't have to be dynamic and like being able to add additional games.
So this guy, we have game 1, 2, or 3. Yeah. So if it looked like this, if this is what you got on the exam, then yeah, you just do game 1, 2, or 3. You don't have to have game 5, game 6, game 7, game 8. It's not going to be that complicated by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, in this case, if this was your exam, you would just hard code game 1, game 2, game 3. Great question. Cool. So now let's say timestamps equals true. Perfect. We are good to go. We want to add in our timestamps, right? When they're created, when they're updated, when they're deleted, all that good stuff. And then now the last thing I need to do in my model is I need to actually export it. So I'm going to say, I could do it this way, where I say this, and then I say module dot exports equals player. Module dot exports equals player. I could do this, or the other way is, let me comment this out. I could say module dot exports equals mongoose. I'm just going to say mongoose model dot model player schema. Both of these work just fine. They're doing the same exact thing. This one's just creating a variable first and then exporting it. This one's just exporting it. They do the exact same thing. No change at all. Let's do this guy because that's what we're used to. But just wanted to show you this is a shorthand. Actually, let's do the shorthand version. Less code is always better. Well, not always, but this is easy to read and understand anyway, so we're good to go. That's always a fine balance. You want to have as little code as possible, but as much code as it takes to understand. Cool. So our model is created. Are there any questions on this? Yeah, so somebody asked, could I explain enum a little bit more? What this will do is we have taken in these values, and this can be any sort of array, or this can be an array that has 10 or 20 values if we wanted. Basically, what this is saying is that our game2 status can only be one of these three values. So though we have type string, right? When we have game2 status, it is a string. But if we didn't have this enum, somebody could put unicorn as their status, right? It doesn't make sense. We want to limit what our players are allowed to do. And it looks like for our case, we're just going to handle basically if they click playing, then we will have the control of only passing in playing or whatever's necessary. If they click not playing or undecided, we'll have that. But let's say that they were trying to pass in something, or they were trying to say, but there were only a few values that they wanted, or we wanted to allow them to have, and didn't want them just to say, as long as it is, a min length of 2, and it's a string, your status could be anything. We don't want that. We only want it to be one of 3 things, either undecided, playing, or not playing. So now what it'll do is whenever this status is given, it'll check, does it match this? If it doesn't, it'll throw an error. It's another validation we have. But we can say if it is created without a game 1 status, a game 2 status, a game 3 status, by default, let's just set it as undecided. So when we create our player, we'll just create these 2 things. And by default, it'll also add on these guys, and their value should be undecided. But we'll see that when we actually create some. Cool.
Sorry,
So now our
quick
model's
question.
done. Yeah, go ahead.
If you have the default, do you still need the required?
I guess that's true. You don't, because it's not required, right? Because it'll automatically go to default.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and get rid of that. Yeah, we can go ahead and get rid of that. That's true. That's kind of like how it's like we were looking today in the office hour when you have find one by ID or find one. And it's sort of like if you're ever using find one by ID. Yeah, no, so that's funny. Yeah, no, so we actually don't even need required because anytime it's created, they actually are either pressing a button or it's going to be undecided. So you're good to go. Great job. Thanks, Michael. That's taking out 3 lines of code for us because it was redundantly doing the same thing because it would pass because it would be given, though it's required, but it's always going to have a value because it's either going to be one of these 3 or if not, it's going to be default pass. So that's pretty funny. Cool. All right. So we've got our models. We got 25 more minutes. Let's jump in. We've already gotten our config set up. We're in our server. Let's go to our controllers, right? And so in my controllers, I'm going to have a player dot controllers or controller.js. Perfect. Now, in order for me to bring this in and to have my controller, what are the things what is my main thing it's dependent on? What is my controller attached to? Yeah, my model, right? I'm going to say const player equals, and then I'm going to require my player model. So it's going to come in here and it's going to grab this guy. Now, just as a reminder, because we had our model and we said player right here, and we didn't identify a collection type, it's going to take this value, come in here, it's going to create a collection in Team Manager of players, but because I already preemptively did that, should be good to go. It should associate the same. Cool, just as a reminder there. Model's done for right now. We'll pull it up when we're actually creating with Postman. But yes, first in, we bring in our player. Now, our first one is, let's just do find all players. This is a great one to start with. We talked about this in office hour. I like to just do one. I like to set up my model, and then I like to do one controller and one route, test it, make sure everything is up and running. I don't have any errors. If you get into your exam, and sometimes your brain is like foggy, right? And you're stressed because exams are stressful, and you build out all your controllers and all your routes because you're like, I still have to do React and all that. I would say that you could get into an error and it will take you longer than just testing as you go, right? So I would get in the habit of, at least for me, at the very beginning, I like to test, make sure everything's set up correctly. And then maybe you could build out one or two different methods and then keep testing, right? So cool. It's exactly what we're going to do. We're doing module exports, find all players. This is what we're creating, this dot find. It's just getting us everybody. This is a request and a response. It takes it in. If everything is good, it gives us all players. We talked about this in office hour. If this has a parentheses around it, that's okay. But because it's only one value, we can get away with not having a parenthesis around it. They did the exact same thing. What this is going to give back is all players. Yep. So we'll just do this for right now, because right now it's going to be an empty array. We don't have anything in our database. So I want to show that it'll say players and it'll show an empty array. And then if anything is wrong, then we will catch that and we'll pass in the error and we'll show it. Cool. So that's all done. Now my last thing I need is my routes, right? I need my route that's going to associate this. So I'm going to say player.routes.js. Perfect. Now my model needed mongoose. My controller needs my model. What does my route need? Yeah, my controller, exactly. That's just how it kind of goes: route to controller, controller to model, model to database. You can kind of think about that in that's how the computer is going to operate. We're going to get something that goes to route. That route is going to check, do we have that? Cool. Let's go into our controller, find the method. That controller is going to go into that specific collection of in this case, our player. It's going to run some information, grab it, take it all the way back. So, yep. So I need to const, I'm going to say player controller, and that is going to require controllers of player controller. Cool. So now I can connect and do the two. I'm going to say module exports app, and then app.get. And then in this case, we're just going to do API/players. I could just say /players. That'd be the same thing. The API part is nice though. And I was working with a Slack API today, and they do the same thing. It's /API/whatever. So it's normal to have API here. Like even Slack, major company that has the same sort of structure. So cool. So we're gonna do player controller, find all players. Now what I want to do is I want to actually test this. We don't have anything in our database now, but if I were to come here, and I am just going to take what we did in office hour, and I'm going to just change it all. So we're going to have players. So I have my localhost 8000 /API/players. This is a GET request. So what I should get, what I'm expecting, is a players, and then it's going to say players, and it's going to give back an object, and it should just be an empty array. And I got an issue. Can't get API/players. So a couple things. Our database is up and running. So what that tells me is API/players, PLAYERS, localhost 8000, API/PLAYERS, cannot get it, app.get. Oh, let's see. Module exports app, perfect. App.get API/players, player controller, find all players, acquire. This goes up and running. Localhost 8000 / API / players. Not passing anything in. Giving me an issue.
Did you look at your server?
Yeah, my server is fine. I'm just gonna cancel it.
The server.js.
Oh, that's right. Thank you, Gray. Remember, I commented out my route. Duh.
Yeah. It was
Thank
actually Chris.
you.
Chris.
Oh, thanks. So it wasn't even the order, but it was because remember, I had commented that out because if I didn't, then my node mon was going to crash because it was going to say, I don't know what player.routes is. So now that I have that, I should be good to go. Thank you so much for that. Click come here. Perfect. Now is exactly what I wanted. We've got an empty array. Okay, cool. We don't have anything in there, but that tells me that we are working. We are good to go. We're connected to our database. We're able to grab stuff. We just don't have anything in there, but cool. So if I were you, now is when I would say, okay, cool. I've done that. I can run in and let's actually create some controllers. So there's going to be a couple things we want to do. So we want to do find all. We just did that. We want to be able to create, obviously. I would say for our exam, let's go ahead and practice editing as well and then deleting. So all of those things, delete is here, but edit isn't on this, but I would like for us to be able to edit. Ideally, what we're going to do is we're going to click this player. They'll go to their page and there'll be a button that says edit. So we're going to build out some edit functionality as well because it will be necessary for your exam. Cool. So I'm going to comment my code, find all players. If I wanted to find one player, that's what we're going to do first. So I'm going to say module.exports, find one single player. I'm just going to say find one player. That sounds, one single player sounds redundant. Cool. Now we look at this and we decided that there's something we're going to use. We're going to say player, and in office hour, we talked about the different types of queries that we can do. And here's kind of the main ones that we're going to deal with. Now, when we're dealing with just, we're finding one player, we're updating a player, we're deleting a player, I'm going to suggest that you don't have to, you can do, find one or update one. But I'm going to suggest that you actually use this find by ID. It just is a way, because these are going to return the first object that matches whatever criteria you have. Now, obviously, if it's an ID, there's only one in there, it's going to do the same thing. But I like making sure and sort of preventing any way of mess up. So I'm going to use these find by IDs. So when I come into my code, I'm going to say find by ID. And if I do this find by ID, this ID is inferred. So I actually don't have to say this is the key you're looking for, because it knows if I'm using find by ID, it knows I'm looking for my ID. So then all I have to do is pass in the ID. And you can see that here in the documentation. If I say find by ID, it'll show right here how we can say find by ID with the ID is almost equivalent. And we looked at why that was almost, but to this ID. So it's doing the same thing. It's just how it handles something, but we should be good to go. Cool. So we're able to find one. I need to go create my route for that. So let's go into my routes. I'm going to say app.get players of ID. Perfect. Let's find one player. Should be good to go. But before I do anything, let's go ahead and create, because then we can actually test this one out. So usually what I'll do, this find one is just a really quick one, an easy one to build. But before I get any further, I actually want to create a player to make sure, okay, this is fully working. So I'm going to say create, same sort of thing that we've always done. We've got our module.exports.create player. It takes in a request and a response. Remember, in our request, there's a key called body. That's the actual request body that we're sending. In this case, with Postman, we're just going to use it's our JSON body. And we're going to take those values and we're going to create a new player. And let's test it out. So let's come here. We've decided and showed that we need to have these game 1, 2, and 3 status should by default be undecided, but I need to pass in a name and a preferred position. So let's go do that. I don't have, before we actually do that, sorry. I created my controller, right? I can create a player. Now I need to create my app.post. App.post. And then I want to do API/players. I'm actually just going to do /players. Doing the same thing because this is post. These can be the exact same thing. I don't want slash. These can be the exact same thing, but you could do /player/new. That's fine. I just like if they're the same because the HTTP verb is different. It allows us to have sort of the same thing. So now that I have this API/players and a post request, so I'm going to say players. And here I'm going to have name. What kind of sport are we doing, guys? Anybody have a desire? Soccer. Okay. Katie, hit me with some soccer stuff. The greatest, the GOAT, Lionel Messi. But what is he, a forward? Or a striker?
We could keep it simple and just have forwards, midfield, and defenders, so you don't have like
Yeah.
10 different positions.
Yeah, forward. Okay. Cool. So is that how you spell forward? Forward, W-A-R-D. Yep. Cool. So let's do name, Lionel Messi, forward. And then let's see what happens. This is a post request to API players. We're passing in that information. Cool. So now because we have those defaults, we see that these 3 keys are made of game 1 status, game 2, game 3, and then by default go to undecided. We have Messi, his preferred position is forward. And we have an ID created out, updated out. Let's make a couple more. Thanks, Katie. We've got Sophia Smith. They are forward. Let's do this. Perfect. We've got Megan Rapinoe. I think she lives partly in Seattle. Rapinoe. Also forward. And then we'll do Julie Ertz. And their midfielder. Perfect. Cool. So we can check and make sure all of these are being created by just running our localhost get. Now we get all these players. So really cool. And then if we wanted to do our get by ID, so I'm going to say players. And then let's go ahead and just get one person. Let's make sure that this matches. We have API/players/ID. So let's go in here. API/players/ID. So that should work perfect. And we should get Messi back. Perfect. And we do. We get Messi. So we're able to read one. We're able to read all of them. We're able to create. And so let's go ahead and update and delete. Those are the functionalities we want to be able to create. This is good to go. We don't need this open anymore. So I want to update player. So I'm going to say module exports update player. Now I'm going to use the player dot find by ID and update, because again, I can just pass in my rec.params, .params.id. Perfect. Then I'm gonna have my dot then. Here's my updated player, catch, we're good to go. Now, again, because of this find by ID and find by ID and update, we don't have to say, underscore ID, but there's two more things we have to pass in other than just these rect params. Can anybody tell me what it is? What are the two things I have to pass in? Yeah, my rect.body. Rect.body. And we have this new true and run validator true. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to return the new object, and it's also going to make sure that our new values match our validator, right? It's going to make sure that we can't get by and say that we had a minimum length of 2 and we create something with 4 and then we take it down to 1. This is still making sure, nope, these values are still different. Cool. So let's go ahead and save this. Let's create my route. Now let's test this. I'm not sure with these default values if put is going to be exactly what we want here. Let's test it. So I'm going to take Lionel Messi and let's update. Let's say I want to update his position to preferred position. Let's copy this. Oops, not save. Copy. Let's go to my put. Let's test this. I'm actually not sure. Messi. And then let's say actual preferred position is midfielder. Let's check this. Okay. So now we know because these are a default, they're good to go even when we're updating. We don't have to pass in that information. We can if we want, but we don't have to because it'll default to this. But as a reminder, anytime we're using put, we have to update all of this information. So name and preferred position. If I used patch and I passed in preferred position, it'll just update that one piece. So like, let's do the same thing. Take this out. And we just want to update this. Let's see if this works. I get an error. Cannot patch. Oh, because I don't have a patch. So just had a put. Now let's try it again. Cool. So let's change this back to forward. Perfect. So if I just use patch, I just have to pass in one piece of information. If I used put, I had to also pass in the name as well. Because remember, it changes the entire object. That's not a default value or the ID / created out, updated out. Cool. At least we know how to use both of those now. So I'm going to keep that here. I'm going to say changes all values in the database. And then I'm going to say changes only the values in the request.body. Cool. Cool. And then the last thing we need to do is just be able to delete. I'm going to say app.delete. We're going to do the same sort of thing. App player's ID. We need to create a function called delete player. Let's jump into there. And so we're going to delete our player. Let's do module exports, delete player, find by ID and delete. Perfect. We're passing in our rect params. We don't need to say ID underscore. We have our promise and our error or catch. So now if I come here and I take this guy, actually, I'm just going to do this. Delete. I don't have anything in the body. But this is a delete. This should delete Lionel Messi. Cool. So it gives me that back. But if I come here, because it gives back the value that we deleted, now you can see that in all of my in my request to get all of my players, Lionel Messi is now gone. The GOAT has been dethroned. Okay. So our entire backend is set up for right now. We're able to delete a player, update a player, create a player, find one player, find all players. We're able to get all of that information set up. Are there any questions on our backend setup? We are fully done. Anything that's confusing, does this make sense? We've gone through it a couple times now. We introduced a couple new things, enum, default. Any questions? Yeah, put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense. 0 if it does not. Awesome. Well, cool. We're going to continue on Tuesday. We're going to use cores and we're going to set up our front end. And then from there, we're going to be able to start connecting the two. And then on Wednesday, we will have finished all of the functionality, or we should at least have all the functionality finished. If there's anything left over, we'll have just a little bit of time on Thursday. But I also will be doing a deployment and we'll talk about what the exam looks like and how to move forward. Or maybe Monday, I'll kind of hit on the exam a little bit so that way you guys know what to do and what to be prepared for that. You only have one core assignment this week, Jokes API, but please remember that when we are dealing with actual assignments, that in order for you to get a belt exam, you have to be qualified, if you will. And all that qualification means is that you have finished you have finished 90% of all core assignments week 5 and on. Week 5, from week 1 to week 5. Because technically, you have until Sunday on week 6, so I can't require the week 6. So this 90% does not include these 3. It's just these guys right here. But I would really, really, really encourage you before you do the exam, at least to get started on Product Manager 1. You should be at least through 2, hopefully through 3. Like, my encouragement, take this weekend, really try to work through Product Manager. If you're a little bit behind, that's okay. But try to get through Product Manager before you just start the exam, because it'll be a little bit more challenging if you do it that way.
Highly, highly, highly encourage it.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't start the exam without completing Product Manager. You can always push the exam back, to the, a few days or whatever, because you have up until, I forgot what date, but we'll see the date. So make sure you get Product Manager.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
You have until the 28th to start an exam.
Yeah.
You got plenty of time. Yeah.
Yep. And just a quick announcement. So this Sunday, some folks wanted me to do an extra office hour. So most of those folks are not in here. So if you're watching this, talking to you. So I'll be here doing an office hour this Sunday. I put some times in the chat, so just make sure you look at the times. And if those times don't work for you, just let me know. I want to make sure everyone feels prepared for the exam. So let me know. Okay, that's all my announcement today.
Thanks so much, Gray. And also, just so you guys know, if I'm unavailable for a meeting or if my meetings are pushed out, Gray's also super available. Not super available, don't want to say that, but Gray is available to meet as well. And they have some other flexibility, like working on Sundays. I don't work on Sundays. And so if you do need some help, that's also an option as well. So cool. That's all I have for today. We've set up our entire backend. So just so you guys see, right, we talked through it and stuff, but we did that in less than an hour. So for the exam, you can see, okay, at least your backend, as you get some practice and some of this, you can kind of come in with a config file created where you just maybe have like a belt DB or something like that. And maybe you just don't know what the exact collection is yet, but you can go in and do that. So you can like have this set up. You can have, your controllers. You just don't have this file yet, but, or these models, but you can have like your node module is set up before the exam, your server JS, there's really nothing in here other than your routes. And you don't know what it's called yet, but your config file should be in there. Like all this can be set up prior. So then whenever you start the exam, you just go in, you add in your routes, your package JSON should already be there. You should already have everything downloaded. Everything you should come with a client and a server created first. Don't even let the time of downloading in npm or using npx create react app, like that'll just cause you more anxiety. My encouragement is build that out beforehand. Only takes a little bit, but have those already built so you can jump in and say, cool, I need to create my model. Let's create that. Then I'm gonna create my controller, my routes. Let's test it real quick. Okay, we're good to go. I've already got my I've already got all this sort of things that maybe you might forget, like get ignore the great one that you might forget if you are super stressed. So have that all built prior. That'd be my encouragement. Cool. Any other questions? I'll push this code to GitHub also. So let me just do that real quick. Híjole. Cool. So all the code should be posted. Let me look at the chat. Somebody asked, will we ever go over deployment in class? We're not gonna do it in class. We'll do it in office hour on Thursday. So we will, the goal, unless we're like super close to finishing the project, we'll figure out how we're gonna do that. But either we will do it hopefully office hour, as long as it's done, we'll do office hour. And if not, I could do like a bonus office hour or something or I could just do a totally other project and just deploy that. So we can get that going. So Thursday or Friday next week, probably Thursday though. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording here.